Desert living was never my dream until I discovered this house. After 15 years of apartment dwelling and saving every extra dollar, I finally had enough for a down payment on a modest home in Saguaro Heights. What sold me was not the house itself, but the quarter-acre lot surrounding it. While neighboring properties displayed the expected gravel landscapes dotted with cacti and desert-adapted shrubs, this one had somehow defied the arid environment to create something magical. I still remember my first walkthrough with the elderly owner, Mr. Henderson. "Built this place in '76, he told me, his weathered hand sweeping across the view of the backyard. "People said you could not grow anything green out here without spending a fortune on water. I proved them wrong." At the time, I nodded politely, more focused on inspection reports than gardening tips. If only I had listened more carefully to his stories about the land. For 5 years after purchase, I poured my soul into expanding that garden. I installed a state-of-the-art irrigation system that used the latest water conservation technology. Drip emitters delivered precise amounts of moisture directly to root zones. Soil sensors monitored ground conditions and prevented overwatering. Smart controllers adjusted schedules based on weather forecasts. This was not just efficient, it was responsible stewardship. My yard became known throughout the neighborhood as the oasis. Desert-adapted flowering plants created year-round color. A small vegetable garden provided fresh produce even in summer heat. Trellised vines shaded south-facing windows, reducing cooling costs. Native trees created habitat for birds and butterflies. Children walking to school would stop to watch hummingbirds dart between salvias. Retired couples took evening strolls past my fence specifically to see what was blooming. Our neighborhood had existed without an HOA for decades, which allowed such personal expression. But 2 years ago, a developer purchased the vacant lot at our community entrance and built 6 luxury estate homes. The sales contracts included formation of a homeowners association that somehow extended authority over all existing properties through some legal maneuver none of us fully understood. At first, the HOA seemed focused only on the new section. Their initial rules were reasonable. No cars parked on streets overnight. Trash bins removed promptly after collection day. Holiday decorations removed within 2 weeks of the holiday. I complied without complaint, even removing the wind chimes they deemed noise pollution, and repainting my garden shed from blue to the approved desert sandstone color. But trouble brewed when Karen Matthews was elected board president 3 months ago. She had moved from California with strong opinions about water usage and property values. Without consulting residents, she hired a neighborhood standards consultant who began issuing violation notices for even minor infractions. The Johnsons were forced to remove a basketball hoop that had stood in their driveway for 12 years. The Garcias had to take down the small flag commemorating their son's military service. Last week, I spoke with my neighbor Robert as he sadly dismantled the treehouse he had built for his grandchildren. "You should watch out for that irrigation system of yours," he warned quietly. I overheard Karen at the grocery store saying that unnaturally green yards were next on her target list, something about property values and water conservation. I dismissed his concern. My system was efficient and largely hidden beneath mulch. Besides, I paid my water bills promptly, and my usage was well below the city average thanks to my technological investments. Surely they could not object to how I used water I legally purchased. That evening, as sunset painted the mountains purple, I walked my property with a sense of pride. I stopped to inspect a desert willow branch that needed slight pruning, then adjusted an emitter that had shifted away from a young agave plant. This garden was not just plants and soil. It was my achievement, my therapy, my connection to the natural world despite urban surroundings. Little did I know that forces were already in motion to destroy it all. The emergency HOA meeting notice arrived by email on a Tuesday afternoon. Mandatory attendance, water usage policy amendment discussion. Thursday, 7 p.m. No agenda was attached, no background provided. Already this violated the HOA bylaws requiring 5 business days notice and full transparency of meeting content. But rules seemed increasingly flexible when Karen Matthews wanted something. I arrived 15 minutes early to find the community center parking lot already full. Inside, the atmosphere crackled with tension. Homeowners clustered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones that fell silent whenever a board member passed. I found a seat near the back beside Eleanor Winters, who had lived in the neighborhood for over 30 years. "This does not feel right," Eleanor whispered. "They have set up the room differently. Look how they have elevated the board table on that platform, like a courtroom." She was right. The 7 board members sat above us, with Karen centered behind a microphone. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, contrasting with her crimson blazer. Unlike the casual attire of residents, she wore what appeared to be a designer suit. The wall behind them displayed a large projection screen currently showing the HOA logo. At precisely 7:00, Karen struck a small gavel 3 times. "This emergency session will now come to order. We face an urgent situation regarding water usage that cannot wait for our regular quarterly meeting." She nodded to a man beside her who clicked a remote. The screen displayed satellite images of our neighborhood with certain properties highlighted in red. My home was among them. These red zones represent properties with water consumption exceeding our new sustainability thresholds, Karen announced. "Our consultant has determined that continued excessive irrigation presents a threat to community resource management and aesthetic cohesion." For 30 minutes, Karen and her consultant presented charts, statistics, and photographs, all without allowing questions. They spoke of desert-appropriate aesthetics, water table concerns, and community standard enforcement. Never once did they mention that the highlighted homes represented the original residents, those who had established the neighborhood's character long before the HOA existed. When the presentation concluded, Karen announced, "We will now open the floor for brief comments before voting on the Water Conservation Initiative. Please limit remarks to 30 seconds." I raised my hand immediately and approached the microphone set up in the center aisle. I had prepared for this possibility, bringing documentation in a folder under my arm. "Good evening. I would like to address several factual errors in the presentation. First, according to City Water Department records, which I have here, the red highlighted properties actually use less water per square foot than the newly developed homes. Second, desert landscaping does not necessarily mean eliminating all non-cactus plants. Most importantly, my irrigation system." The microphone went dead. I tapped it, believing it had malfunctioned. "Thank you for your input," Karen interrupted, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Your 30 seconds have elapsed. The board has reviewed all relevant data and made its determination based on professional consultation." "But you have not seen these documents," I protested, holding up my folder. "The decision has been made," Karen declared, her voice cold. "Next speaker, please." I stood there for a moment in disbelief before returning to my seat. 3 other homeowners attempted to speak, each cut off mid-sentence when their points contradicted the board's position. Several nodded supportively to me as I passed, but none dared to speak out forcefully. The vote was a foregone conclusion. 5 board members raised hands in favor, with only 2 abstaining. Not one voted against. Karen then revealed the full scope of the new policy. All non-desert compliant irrigation systems must be removed within 30 days. Only hand watering would be permitted, limited to 15 minutes twice weekly. Properties failing inspections would face daily fines of $200. As we filed out of the meeting, Ted Garcia whispered to me, "This is not legal. They cannot do this." But 3 days later, the certified letter arrived confirming that they were indeed doing it. The inspection date was already scheduled. I had exactly 27 days to destroy the irrigation system that kept my garden alive. That night, I stared out at my yard illuminated by security lights. Unbidden, a memory surfaced from 5 years ago during the property closing. Old Mr. Henderson had mentioned something about the history of this land before development, something about water rights from when it was agricultural. At the time, I had nodded politely, focused on signing documents. Now I wondered, what exactly had he been trying to tell me? The week following the HOA decree passed in a blur of anger and desperation. I consulted the HOA bylaws, city ordinances, and water regulations, seeking any loophole to protect my garden. Nothing seemed to offer escape from the draconian new rules. My beautiful plants would wither and die in the desert heat without adequate irrigation. Rain pattered against the windows one evening as I sat surrounded by property documents from my home purchase. The soft glow of my laptop illuminated stacks of papers I had not reviewed since buying the house. Page after page of disclosures, warranties, and legal descriptions yielded nothing useful. But tucked inside the original property survey was a yellowed business card for Mr. Henderson with a phone number, an address for Sunshine Retirement Village. The next morning, I drove 20 miles to the retirement community on the outskirts of town. The receptionist hesitated when I asked for Gerald Henderson. "Mr. Henderson does not get many visitors," she said, studying me carefully. "May I tell him what this is regarding?" "His former home in Saguaro Heights," I explained. "I purchased it 5 years ago and need to ask about some historical details of the property." Minutes later, I was escorted to a small apartment overlooking a courtyard garden. Mr. Henderson, now well into his 90s but still sharp-eyed, greeted me with surprising enthusiasm. "The garden fellow, please tell me you have not killed my pomegranate tree." We sat drinking coffee as I explained the HOA situation. His face darkened with each detail. "Homeowners associations," he muttered. "Tiny kingdoms for people who could never win a real election." When I finished describing the water restrictions, he actually laughed. "They cannot stop you from watering, not on that property." I leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "Did you not read the water rights documentation in your property packet? That neighborhood was Paradise Citrus Orchard until 1971. The original water source was not city lines, but agricultural channels from the Eastern Irrigation District." My confusion must have been evident because he rose slowly and retrieved a photo album from his bookshelf. He opened to black and white photographs showing vast groves of citrus trees. My father purchased 5 acres when they parceled off the old orchard. Most new owners capped the agricultural water lines and connected to city water when it became available. Easier that way. But I kept both systems functioning. My heart began racing. "Are you saying there is another water source on my property?" Mr. Henderson nodded, eyes twinkling. "The main access valve should still be near the northwest corner, probably buried under a few inches of soil by now. The HOA can control city water all they want, but those agricultural water rights are grandfathered by state law. Been that way since 1932. They cannot touch those." The next day, I requested all available property records from the county recorder's office. The clerk seemed puzzled by my specific interest in water rights and irrigation easements, but helped me locate the relevant documents. Hours passed as I hunched over yellowed maps and legal descriptions. Then I found it, a water rights certificate dated 1932, never surrendered when the land was rezoned from agricultural to residential. The document referenced permanent water access rights from the Paradise Agricultural Water Cooperative, transferable to all future property owners, with service maintained via the original infrastructure or its modern equivalents. Most importantly, a paragraph at the bottom explicitly stated that these rights shall not be subject to future municipal or private restrictions except by act of state legislature. I drove home with the precious documents safely stored in my briefcase, hope rising for the first time since the HOA meeting. That evening, I searched my yard with new purpose. Using the old property maps as reference, I paced the northwestern section near my property line. Nothing was visible on the surface. Decades of landscaping had hidden any trace of the agricultural past. On impulse, I borrowed a metal detector from my neighbor who enjoyed treasure hunting. The device remained silent across most of the yard, but near an ancient mesquite tree, it suddenly emitted a high-pitched scream. I marked the spot and returned with a shovel as twilight approached. The first 6 inches were just soil and roots. Then my shovel struck something solid. Dropping to my knees, I cleared dirt away with my hands, working frantically as darkness fell. My fingers touched metal, a circular valve cover approximately 12 inches in diameter, its surface corroded but intact. By flashlight, I managed to clear the entire housing and locate what appeared to be the main valve, frozen with decades of disuse. It took all my strength and a liberal application of penetrating oil to finally turn it partially. Nothing happened at first. Then came a deep gurgling sound from below, followed by water slowly seeping up around the valve housing. Inside my home, with dirt still under my fingernails, I spread out the water rights documentation on my kitchen table. According to these papers, I had access to water that no HOA could legally restrict, water that flowed through pipes they knew nothing about. For the first time since receiving that certified letter, I felt a glimmer of something powerful, hope mixed with the sweet possibility of justice. I did not trust my own interpretation of the water rights documents. Before taking any action that might violate HOA rules, even wrongful ones, I needed professional guidance. My online search for water rights attorney led me to Maria Ramirez, who specialized in agricultural and residential water law. Her office occupied a modest building near the county courthouse. Dark wood paneling and overflowing bookshelves gave the space a serious, scholarly atmosphere. Attorney Ramirez, a woman in her 50s with keen eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses, examined my documents with methodical precision. These water rights were established in 1932 and were never relinquished, she confirmed, pointing to crucial paragraphs. The agricultural line is separate from municipal water and operates under different legal frameworks. Your HOA has authority over cosmetic and structural elements visible on your property, but these grandfathered water rights operate under county jurisdiction. I leaned forward anxiously, so they cannot prevent me from using this water source. Not legally, she replied. However, they can certainly make your life difficult if they discover you actively restored the system. HOAs have been known to pursue expensive litigation even when they are wrong, simply to exhaust homeowners financially. Her advice was clear. I had every legal right to use the agricultural water line, but discretion would be wise. She helped me draft a letter asserting my water rights that could be presented if necessary, but suggested I keep this option in reserve. Armed with legal confirmation, I began planning the restoration project with military precision. I took a week of vacation time from work, choosing dates when I knew Karen Matthews would be attending a regional HOA conference. My garage became command central, original property maps taped to walls, irrigation system designs drawn to scale, and a calendar marking known schedules of board members who lived nearby. I could not accomplish this alone. After careful consideration, I confided in 3 neighbors who had also suffered under Karen's reign: Robert, whose grandchildren's treehouse had been demolished; Eleanor, whose request for a medical accessibility ramp had been denied; and the Garcias, whose son's military service flag had been banned. All had gardens at risk from the new water restrictions, and all pledged secrecy. By day, I performed visible compliance with HOA demands. I ostentatiously disconnected sections of my modern irrigation system whenever board members drove by. I made sure Karen could see me removing sprinkler heads from my front yard, wearing an expression of defeated resignation. But as darkness fell each evening, my real work began. Robert arrived with his pickup truck loaded with PVC pipes, valves, and tools. Eleanor, despite her arthritis, proved remarkably adept at identifying the original clay pipe sections using dowsing techniques her father had taught her. Mr. Garcia, a retired plumber, provided invaluable expertise in connecting modern components to the vintage system. We worked mostly by headlamp light, carefully excavating around the old clay pipes. Many sections had cracked over decades and required replacement. Others had been crushed by construction equipment during home building. The agricultural main line itself remained remarkably intact, built to industrial standards that had withstood the test of time. The most challenging aspect was creating junction points where modern irrigation components could connect to the old system. We installed underground control boxes housing electronic valves that could be operated remotely from my smartphone. Special adapters were required to transition between the large clay pipes and modern PVC. Every component had to be buried deep enough to avoid detection during casual inspection. One night disaster nearly struck. We were connecting the final main junction when headlights swept across my backyard. Everyone froze as a vehicle slowed in front of my house. For heart-stopping seconds, we remained motionless in the darkness, tools in hand, half buried in dirt. The car, Karen's distinctive luxury SUV, eventually continued down the street. We resumed work only after waiting 5 full minutes in silence, hands shaking with adrenaline. For 12 consecutive nights, we labored under cover of darkness. I developed blisters that hardened into calluses. My back ached constantly. My fingernails broke and my hands cracked from constant exposure to soil and water. Yet I had never felt more purposeful. On our final night, we connected the last sections and performed a low-pressure test. Water flowed through the entire restored network without leaks. We carefully concealed all evidence of digging, replacing sod and repositioning plants to hide our work. By dawn, not a trace of our nocturnal activities remained visible. I stood in my darkened yard holding the control app on my phone. With one tap, I could activate the entire hidden system. Water would flow from the agricultural line through underground pipes to reach roots directly without any surface evidence. My garden could survive, even thrive, while appearing to comply with all HOA restrictions. But timing was crucial. The HOA inspection was scheduled for next week. I needed to maintain the appearance of compliance until then. The app remained inactive as I watched the sunrise illuminate my partially dismantled visible irrigation system. The hidden network waited patiently beneath the soil, ready but dormant, a secret weapon in a battle not yet fully joined. The morning of the official HOA inspection arrived with cruel timing. A heat wave had settled over our region, pushing temperatures above 100 degrees by 9:00 a.m. My garden, now deprived of its regular irrigation for nearly 2 weeks, showed visible signs of stress. Leaf edges had begun browning on many plants. Flowers drooped sadly in the punishing sun. I had spent the previous day ensuring that all traces of my modern irrigation system were removed from sight. Sprinkler heads had been extracted, leaving only empty holes that I filled with matching soil. Control boxes were disconnected and stored in my garage. Valve covers were buried under a layer of decorative rock. To any observer, it appeared I had fully capitulated to the HOA demands. From my kitchen window that morning, I watched Karen Matthews drive by slowly in her white luxury SUV. Passenger window rolled down as she documented my yard with her phone camera. The smug satisfaction on her face was unmistakable even from a distance. She made no attempt to hide her surveillance, wanting me to know I was being monitored. The inspection team arrived precisely at 10:00 a.m. Karen, 2 board members and their landscape compliance consultant, carrying clipboards and moisture meters. I greeted them with deliberate weariness in my posture and resignation in my voice. As you can see, I have removed the entire irrigation system as required, I stated flatly, gesturing to the visibly declining garden. I hope this meets with your approval. The consultant moved methodically through my yard, inserting his moisture meter into the soil at random intervals. Karen followed close behind, making notes and occasionally pointing to plants requesting specific testing. I trailed them silently, playing the role of defeated homeowner while secretly recording the entire inspection on my phone in my pocket. The soil moisture levels are consistent with hand watering only, the consultant finally reported. No evidence of automated irrigation detected. Karen paused beside a rosemary bush that had thrived for 4 years but now showed signs of water stress. You see, this is what happens when people think they are above community standards, she announced to the other board members, her voice carrying deliberately so neighbors might overhear. Individual aesthetic preferences cannot supersede community water conservation goals. I bit my tongue, nodding with feigned acceptance. Is there anything else required of me? I asked, allowing my voice to carry just enough edge to seem appropriately frustrated but resigned. Maintain compliance, Karen replied curtly. Random inspections will continue throughout the summer. Remember that hand watering is permitted only on Tuesdays and Saturdays, 15 minutes maximum. After they departed, I slowly dragged my garden hose to water a few priority plants, carefully staying within the permitted time limit. Neighbors watched from behind curtains and over fences, some offering sympathetic glances. We had all received the HOA newsletter Karen had distributed the previous week, featuring before and after photos of my yard as a case study in successful enforcement. That glossy publication now rested in a growing file alongside every communication, inspection report, and legal document related to this conflict. Evidence meticulously compiled for a confrontation I knew would eventually come. Each evening, I performed a visible show of concern for my struggling plants, checking them sadly, removing the most damaged leaves, applying the minimal allowed hand watering with dramatic sighs audible to any watching neighbors. The Oscar-worthy performance continued during daylight hours while hidden moisture sensors throughout my garden beds constantly monitored soil conditions, feeding data to my phone. The deterioration was painful to witness. Plants that had flourished under my care for years now struggled to survive. The vibrant colors that once defined my yard faded daily under the relentless sun. Hummingbirds that had visited regularly now bypassed my property, finding nothing worth their interest. At night, I sometimes stood at my window watching the moonlight on my fatting garden, hand hovering over the activation button on my phone app. The hidden system waited, ready to deliver life-giving water through invisible channels. But the time was not yet right. I needed absolute certainty that my countermove would be legally unassailable and perfectly timed for maximum effect. So I waited, building my case while my beloved plants suffered, a necessary sacrifice in a battle that had become about much more than just water. July arrived with unprecedented ferocity. Meteorologists called it the worst heat wave in 40 years as temperatures soared past 110 degrees for 10 consecutive days. The desert sun behaved like a merciless enemy, scorching everything in its path. Weather alerts warned of extreme danger to people, pets, and plants. Across Saguaro Heights, the devastation was heartbreaking. Lawns that had managed to survive with minimal watering now surrendered completely, browning within days. Young trees that homeowners had nurtured for years suddenly dropped leaves in desperate self-preservation. Decorative shrubs shriveled into twisted, brittle shadows of their former selves. Each morning revealed new casualties in the neighborhood. The Garcia family lost a 20-year-old orange tree that had produced fruit for their annual community breakfast. The playground area withered into a dust bowl where children no longer played. Even desert-adapted plants struggled under the extreme conditions combined with severe water restrictions. Most concerning were the effects on our elderly neighbors. Several had moved to our community specifically for the joy of retirement gardening in our previously less restricted environment. Now, they faced not just the loss of beloved plants but dangerous conditions when attempting to provide even the minimal allowed hand watering. Mrs. Abernathy, our 81-year-old widow who lived 3 doors down, had maintained her award-winning hydrangeas since her husband died 7 years earlier. They bloomed in brilliant blue every summer, a feat requiring special soil amendments and regular moisture in our alkaline environment. She had often told me that tending those flowers kept her connected to her late husband, who had given her the first plants on their anniversary. From my home office window on Wednesday afternoon, I noticed Mrs. Abernathy dragging her garden hose in the punishing heat. Though not her designated watering day, she clearly could not bear to watch her hydrangeas perish. I considered going to help her when suddenly she crumpled to the ground between her flower beds. I sprinted from my house, phone already dialing emergency services. By the time paramedics arrived, several neighbors were applying wet cloths to Mrs. Abernathy's face and neck. Her skin burned with heat as she drifted in and out of consciousness. "My flowers," she murmured as they lifted her onto the stretcher. "They will die without water." That evening, an emergency HOA meeting was convened via video conference. Dozens of homeowners logged in, their faces grim with concern. Many immediately raised the issue of temporary suspension of water restrictions during the unprecedented heat emergency. Karen Matthews appeared on screen from her air-conditioned home office, her expression impassive. Behind her hung framed certificates of her HOA credentials. "The board understands your concerns," she began without a trace of actual understanding in her voice. "However, our water conservation plan was implemented for long-term community benefit and must be maintained regardless of temporary weather patterns." "This is not about landscaping preferences anymore," Robert argued, his voice breaking with emotion. "Mrs. Abernathy is in the hospital with heat stroke because of these restrictions." The board is not responsible for individuals who choose to garden during peak heat hours, Karen replied coldly. That represents poor personal judgment, not policy failure. For 30 minutes, residents pleaded for common sense, for humanity over rules. Each appeal was methodically denied or deflected. The meeting concluded with Karen's reminder that surveillance of water usage would be increased during this period of temptation, and that violation fines would be doubled during the emergency declaration. That night, I sat in darkness beside my bedroom window, watching ambulance lights flash at another home down the street, the second heat-related emergency of the day. The neighborhood I loved was suffering needlessly. Plants that represented years of care and investment were dying. Elderly neighbors were risking their health to save living things they cherished. At exactly 2:13 a.m., I stood in my backyard under a moon partially obscured by wildfire haze from distant mountains. The temperature still hovered near 95 degrees despite the late hour. My finger hovered over the activation button on my phone app as doubts cycled through my mind. What if someone discovered my secret system? What if Karen found legal means to challenge my water rights? What if this escalated beyond a neighborhood dispute into something more serious? But then I remembered Mrs. Abernathy being loaded into the ambulance, her frail hand reaching toward her beloved hydrangeas one last time. I thought of the wildlife that had abandoned our neighborhood as water sources disappeared. I recalled the joy my garden had once brought to passing schoolchildren. With a decisive tap, I activated the system. Nothing visible happened at first. No sprinkler heads emerged, no water sprayed into the air. The system I had designed operated entirely beneath the surface. Water flowed silently through the restored agricultural lines into specialized underground emitters that delivered moisture directly to root zones without surface evidence. I knelt and pressed my palm against the soil. Already I could feel the blessed moisture rising from below, invisible to observers but life-giving to the roots that desperately absorbed it. For several minutes, I moved through my yard in darkness, touching different areas to confirm the system was working properly. Before returning inside, I stood quietly absorbing the profound significance of this moment. This was more than irrigation. This was resistance against senseless destruction, against arbitrary power, against rules that served no one but their creator. By dawn, subtle changes were already visible. Leaves that had curled tightly in defense now relaxed slightly. The soil showed hints of darkness, revealing hidden hydration. Plants stood marginally more upright, responding to the night's secret nourishment. I maintained my established routine when Karen drove by on her morning inspection route. I gazed mournfully at my garden, shoulders slumped in apparent defeat, while beneath the surface, an invisible resurrection had begun. Nature cannot be fooled. While landscapes throughout Saguaro Heights continued their decline over the next week, my garden began a transformation that could only be described as miraculous. Plants visibly rejuvenated day by day. Flowers that had closed their blooms now reopened. Leaves regained their vibrant colors. Life returned with inexplicable vigor. Karen Matthews noticed immediately. Her morning drive-bys evolved into multiple daily patrols, her luxury SUV slowing to a crawl as she scrutinized my inexplicably recovering landscape. Several times she parked across the street, taking photos with a telephoto lens. I maintained my performance, appearing puzzled and grateful for the unexpected recovery whenever neighbors commented. 10 days after activating my hidden system, a courier delivered notice of an emergency compliance inspection, scheduled for the following morning with only 1 hour's warning. I welcomed the inspection team with calm confidence, knowing they would find no evidence of rule violations. The same consultant tested soil moisture levels throughout my property. His confusion grew with each reading. "The moisture distribution is unusual," he muttered to Karen. "Consistent throughout the root zones but with relatively dry surface soil." "That is impossible without irrigation," Karen snapped. "Check again." For 45 minutes, they searched for evidence, probing soil, examining plants, inspecting the perimeter of my property for hidden sprinkler heads or hoses. They found nothing conclusive. That night, my security cameras captured Karen herself entering my property at 11:30 p.m., flashlight in hand. She moved methodically through my garden beds, searching for evidence of forbidden watering. She even dug into the soil in several locations before finally departing empty-handed at midnight. The security footage recorded every trespass, every illegal search, every violation of homeowner rights. The next morning brought notice of an emergency HOA meeting called specifically to address suspected violations of water usage restrictions. The meeting was scheduled for 6:00 p.m. that same day at the community center. I arrived carrying a leather portfolio filled with documents carefully organized by Attorney Ramirez. I took a seat near the front as Karen called the meeting to order. "We have gathered to address serious concerns regarding suspected violations of our water conservation policy," Karen began, her gaze fixed directly on me. "Certain properties appear to be maintaining inappropriate landscape hydration despite restrictions." For 15 minutes, she presented photographs comparing various yards throughout the neighborhood to mine. The evidence was visual and compelling. My garden thrived while others withered. She concluded by directly accusing me of violating HOA regulations and proposed immediate maximum fines plus liens against my property. "Does the homeowner wish to respond to these allegations?" she finally asked, clearly expecting stammered excuses or denials. I approached the table calmly and opened my portfolio. "Yes, I would like to respond with several items for the official record." I placed the original agricultural water rights documentation on the table. This certificate establishes water rights that predate not just this HOA, but most buildings in this county. These rights, established in 1932, are attached to my property and explicitly protected from restriction by municipal or private entities. Next came the county certification confirming the separate water system status, followed by Attorney Ramirez's legal opinion letter. Finally, I added security camera footage showing Karen's unauthorized nighttime property invasion. "My property has access to a water source that predates this HOA by 89 years, I explained to the stunned room. "According to state law, these grandfathered agricultural water rights cannot be restricted by HOA regulations. Furthermore, I have documentation of unauthorized entry onto my property by the board president, which constitutes trespassing under state law." Silence fell over the room as understanding spread across the faces of my neighbors. Then questions erupted from every direction, all focused on accessing the same water system. Within 2 weeks, Karen Matthews was voted off the board following an emergency recall election. The water restrictions were modified to apply only to municipal water usage. A neighborhood cooperative formed to extend the agricultural line access to interested properties. 1 month later, I stood beside Mrs. Abernathy, now recovered from her hospitalization, as we connected her beloved hydrangeas to the same life-giving water source that had saved my garden. Across the street, a real estate agent hammered a "for sale" sign into Karen Matthews' front yard. My garden flourished more beautifully than ever before, but its greatest achievement was not its blooms or foliage. The true victory grew in the renewed community spirit that flourished alongside the plants, neighbors helping neighbors, sharing resources, and standing together against arbitrary power. Sometimes the sweetest flowers grow from the most challenging soil.